process. When it was announced, it also included the fact that there will be now more possibilities for foreign telecommunications companies to invest in building infrastructure to develop broadband internet in Cuba, and I would like to know if this is actually happening, if the private sector is involved in bringing network to Cuba. And another thing I would like to ask you is, it seems like the students have access in schools, and they're of course supervised by adults, by teachers or educators. Does it mean, is it a choice of this policy that students only have access with adults, or is it because you want to kind of see, control what the children get to see, or is there any rationale for that, or is it just because it's limited to schools because you don't have enough infrastructure to provide it elsewhere?
Miren, la primera parte de su pregunta.
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I think that, the person who can answer this and it's in a better capacity to answer this is Engineer Ernesto. He is the IT director at the Ministry of Telecommunications in Cuba. And luckily, he's right here by my side. And going back to education, before I hand it over to Ernesto, it's not that we want to keep control. We just want to care better for our children. At an early age, children don't know what's right and what's wrong, and they can't tell what will happen if they click an item on the screen. In the previous workshop, we were discussing child pornography and protection of children online, sexual abuse. And this is our objective, indeed, to restrict some websites that can lead to pornography or to pedophilia risks. There are also some surveillance features and supervision and constant observation of what children. We trust our students, but we have a mission as educators. We must care for the children and avoid any problems. And we also have to prevent them from committing mistakes that could affect them morally, or prevent them that they find themselves in situations that they cannot handle. That's why we restrict websites that can be related to sexual abuse or pornography, as is done elsewhere in the world. We use blacklists, internet blacklists. This is what we have been using. Now I'll hand it over to Engineer Ernesto, who will answer the second part of your question. Good afternoon. I think it's important to highlight that Cuba and the United States have started to normalize their relations or reconnect. But for that, of course, the embargo policy needs to change. This is a policy that has harmed our country and our people for over 50 years. And there are also some other issues, such as returning the Cuban lands now occupied by an American military base. So normalization is a process that will be complex and that will require time. We need to make advances according to what is possible. Now, going to the topic of telecommunications, we have made some progress. As you know, agreements have been signed to enable direct traffic. In fact, only just last week we signed an agreement with Sprint so that we can have homing services with Adexa. there is another issue that affects the development of our relations, not only in the area of communications, but in other areas as well. I am referring to the impossibility of accessing funding sources. In fact, the banks are offering several funding lines, and they can make payments and provide for data flows. The Cuban money should go through those flows. So there is an open path with several possibilities. It will be a difficult process and long-lasting. For over 5 decades, Cuba was submitted to hostilities and has been under siege by the largest powerhouse in the world. Now I'll hand it over to Professor Joel. I was told that there is a difference between blockade and an embargo, and the embargo is the word that's better known in Brazil. Embargo are the actions taken against Cuba when the United States approves the German bank in $800 million, or as a French bank did, or imposes a penalty on that bank for having transactions with Cuba. This is really a persecution that applies to all Cuban financial transactions. The embargo is still in place, and this prevents reaching agreements. For example, the agreement with Sprint. In fact, the most expensive phone calls are between the United States and Cuba, and the most expensive roaming charges. The transaction can be made directly, but the funds have to flow through banks from other countries and have to be converted into euros, because Cuba cannot make payments in US dollars. And of course, as you know, every time you engage in a process like this is much more expensive than just having a direct exchange transaction. When we had to make the first main payment to Sprint last month, well, the funds have not arrived yet because the American Treasury is under the control of that money. And of course, this makes business with Cuba very difficult. And so this is no longer an embargo, it's more of a blockade, because either because they apply penalties or they retain the funds when you want to host Cuban content in an external server. If you want to sell technology solutions to the company, to Cuba, everything, of course, leads to sanctions and fines. So we're not being blocked by Haiti, we're being blocked by the United States. For that reason, it's often very difficult for countries to make this decision of establishing commercial relations with Cuba and running this risk. In spite of this, in Cuba, all children attend school. And in spite of this, all sick people in Cuba get medical care with a technology base that uses computers for the benefit of human beings and not the other way around. Cuba is one of the few countries with 11 million inhabitants in which you print all textbooks based only on nationally produced content. And we also have a cartoon making industry that leaves nothing in comparison to Disney. We have our villains, we have our heroes that reflect our cultural traditions. And for that, of course, you need your own set of ideas and culture to draw from. So we're not get anything in in forbidding the access to content. We propose content and we develop critical citizens who can face a whole universe and make his or her own choices based on the information they have and the knowledge they have acquired through education. I am Alberto Fortunato from the Youth Program 2015 IGF.
Activo de la participación.
I would like to know about the participation of youth in the development of the internet. And what other projects does the youth ministry have in mind, considering the embargo and the need to have youth freely access the internet? Today, the Cuban educational curriculum is going through improvements. This improvement process of our educational system is reshaping everything that relates to the use of internet and the use of computers. Even in teaching science, this means that Cuban students will be better prepared and will have access to, content, high quality content. On the other hand, access of the young, which is the part of the population that you're mostly concerned about, is a priority for 2016. Connecting educational centers, both high schools, vocational schools, and higher education from 15 to 18 years old. Those are the schools that the Ministry of Education Services serves due to our proximity with higher education. We want that from those institutes we develop citizens with international level. We all know the prestige that Cuban education has on the high school and higher educational levels. So we have those training programs in higher education and middle school. We also have developed and fostered other skills, and we have also promoted the use of specialized search engines in different areas of knowledge. Areas where information is not as trivial and that are more oriented to science. Today, those search engines exist, but we want to teach students that may not be aware of them how to make searches and how to find knowledge that will make them better human beings and will help them assimilate the higher education curriculum better. Eluina Martinez from Mexico, I would like to congratulate you on your educational initiatives. This is a challenge many countries share. I would like to know how you work with teachers and how you use digital tools in learning. And secondly, how do you assess the development of digital competencies in children and how you monitor their development? I think that you You have addressed interconnectivity in a very effective way. When it's time to update content so that it can be used by teachers in schools, what experience proved to be the most adequate for you? This is a very interesting question. Every 3 months, we update the content in our educational portal. This is something we do on a regular basis. We have professors that specialized in creating content. This makes the teaching experience much richer. They can also upload their own content to the portal. And later this content can be downloaded by students and teachers alike. This is part of our current update process. On the other hand, well, you asked me about the assessment of the content. Our experience, of course, is we have had an experience of 15 years in education. So we have some dedicated departments with more experienced teachers in each of the municipalities of the country. They collaborate with the methodology teams in the provinces that are also linked to a national committee. So it's a scalonated control and supervision system to assess the impact of the use of educational software in Cuban schools. The curriculum of each of the disciplines is prepared to be used together with educational software. And we also have several other activities. When you offer content only as a textbook, usually the teacher will refer the students to a chapter in the portal where there are exercises that the students can take, and after they complete the exercise, they receive feedback. So during the school hours, students have time to use the computers and to take those exercises online. As for teacher training and development, well, we've had a number of years of experience. A teacher to be eligible for a Cuban school has to undergo training. We have several modules, including an ICT module that will foster their skills. We are also creating 16 centers of teacher development that use technology in an experimental way, in tablets, etc., so that we can evaluate the use of this technology in the country. Here we see a sample of the Cuba Educa portal. So we have centers installed in different educational levels, and this helps us monitor the impact of educational content in the skills development of teachers and the academic success of students using this tool. Even though I'm not a specialist in educational topics, I would like to highlight two issues that we believe to be fundamental and that are also linked to the question that has just been asked. Firstly, the portal is not only a tool used for student development. We also have a connection between the portal content and families and teachers, because education is not a responsibility that applies only to schools. The families have a very important role to play, and the portal has been designed under this premise that education should integrate students, teachers, and families alike. And as for content production and the different projects we are engaged in, I would like to mention a nice encyclopedia that has been created in Cuba 5 years ago. And you can see it online, and it's used in all Cuban schools. Today, we also have an offline version that satisfies and complements some infrastructure shortages we experience. We also have a mobile version available. Today, there are over 3 million mobile devices in Cuba, a substantial figure. And this is an encyclopedia that has been developed by the Cubans with the support of many friends around the world. We have high-value historic content in the encyclopedia that serve as a source of information and knowledge for our students. This has been a revolutionary project for our country. Well, 5 years ago, we found ourselves with a problem. Today, connectivity seems to be a very difficult challenge, but 5 years ago it was much worse. And what was said about Cuba, we, of course, everything said that we were in Wikipedia. So we started participating in Wikipedia, but since we were very few, every time we had a chance to contribute, they deleted our comment. As you know, Cuba is at war. And in this war, 99.9% is a war of opinion. They say that Cuba does one thing and we do exactly the opposite. And of course, I am talking about contemporary articles, not articles about what happened 400 years ago or geology or astronomy. Those are the articles in Wikipedia that address contemporary political issues. So we started this project to enable Cuban citizens to participate, because the content is hosted in Cuban servers, but anyone can participate. Today, we have 24,000 collaborators, and part of them not residing in Cuba, and 150,000 articles. And we have over 200,000 hits a day. We have also several other problems. Due to our broadband restrictions, we don't count on much participation, so we invented an offline version. You can download the encyclopedia and you have access to the content. We also have disk-based versions without images for low-capacity computers, other versions with images for the computers available in schools, and versions for Windows and Linux, and also for mobile devices. So computers are connected, and the most interesting thing, I think that there were some, I think it was Yolanda or and the visits are no longer coming from Cuba. They're coming mostly from Mexico. Cuba ranks fourth, first Mexico, Spain, Colombia, and finally Cuba.
We have content on Cuba, and Cuba is always the most consulted. So it shows that we are a competent and competitive site where people seek different points of view on technological, political, and historical data. And there's a much higher reception than what we had initially thought. This is we're celebrating our fifth anniversary, and we grew sevenfold. The 11 million Cubans continue to access this site. So our footprint regarding content in Cuba is much greater than Wikipedia. This is important. It shows our capacity to produce content in Cuba. In 11 million inhabitants, we have 1 million in universities, and all of them have received basic qualification to participate in the information society. We have an important percentage that speaks and uses English and who can participate in English means of communication as well as other languages. All high school students need to reach this level, and people, they are capable of creating content on the web. These are not just content consumers, but rather content producers. They know how to write and create content on the web. This is what is behind the growth of a project such as Educa. Thank you very much, and congratulations. In Cuba, informatics is a subject in elementary education, in preschool education. These are preschool teachers who create basic skills to use keyboards, the mouse, and also language skills, icon language skills, so that children can recognize all icons because they don't know how to read yet. But this creates basic skills to use computers. I had also mentioned that we are improving the school syllabus. Today, we envision that we will once again take on a good practice in programming teaching at earlier ages or school years. So we will evaluate the use of Scratch. We know this. If you have to use the programming code just with algorithms and with visual language, children may resolve complex problems that help to develop logical thinking and their life vision. On the other hand, today we teach programming in pre-college years. For example, in the 12th year, students, they receive a systemic evaluation on the use of programming. And we noticed that in previous years, even if we have not taken this away from the context, there's still a bit lacking in terms of computer teaching. In prior years, we had some students that were motivated and could choose an optional course, but it was not part of the regular syllabus. So they can take programming courses as well as optional or elective courses. On the other hand, regarding professional aspects, for example, in engineers, we have programming engineers. So each province in the country offers a polytechnical course that focuses specifically on teaching programming to so that later we have professionals working as systems analysts. We also provide continuous education, and we have maintained these continuous education courses due to the demand of people specialized in this area. We have the informatics engineer, and the best example would be Mr. Dyron, who graduated at USI, the Computer Sciences University. They graduate 3,000 informatics engineers every year with a high level of preparation. This allows Cuba to have a strength in the production of apps, and this puts us at the forefront when compared to other countries in the continent and other parts of the world, because we have a set of youth who are prepared and present a great potential. These informatics engineers or technicians constitute the two careers we offer. We have several institutes, the Oriente University, the Rio University, Da Banda University, and polytechnical courses as well that are internationally acknowledged because of the formation of higher education professionals in the informatics area.
Blockades by the United States. Telesur from Venezuela, even RT has a channel to get their news and information out, and Al Jazeera. Are there any plans in Cuba to have a channel? Oh,
Excuse me,
okay.
we don't have a translation.
Okay, sorry. Well, what I was asking is, because of the economic blockade and news blockade of the United States, countries have felt that they had to set up, partly, they had to set up their own channels, news channels, information channels, such as Telesur from Venezuela, RT, or Al Jazeera, to reach American people. And are there any plans or interest in developing a news channel similar to that to provide information from a Cuban perspective internationally?
Cuba, together with other Latin American countries, such as Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, are part of a project involving several nations called Telesur. It's very important on the internet. It's a Spanish channel. Telesur, a year ago, started a program line in English. Cuba is a poor country. There's a blockade, and it does not have enough resources to implement a program like this. As happens with large countries that can do this, for example, Russia, China, they have channels like this. It should establish partnerships with other countries to leverage a project like this. Our dream was never to be a protagonist, but to be rather Latin American. And with the help of brother countries in Latin America, defend our culture, our identity, our language. And it's excellent that we speak Spanish in this forum. Unfortunately, there is a disproportion of the content in one language and of those languages of the Northern Hemisphere. There is a significant difference. Not just that, we know very well that many contents that we consume in our language in our countries are developed in other hemispheres. Argentina only consumes 20% of content produced locally. Imagine other countries like Brazil, Mexico, etc. They have a larger territory to create a national content for us. If we do not integrate smaller countries in the world, there are 500 million people speaking Spanish. We Cubans are only 11 million living in Cuba. We are very far from China, which has 1 billion inhabitants. And they have their own language there. I think Chomsky said that. What is a metropolis? It is an army and a language, basically. Since we don't have our sole language, we face this dilemma. We need to seek salvation internally. In Cuba, we have a TV network offering 8 national channels, and we are transitioning towards digital TV. We have 2 channels that just work with education, and they produce this type of content. Very soon, we will evolve with TV, and we will focus on internet and offer TV via internet. Considering the size of the country, considering the low population besides the economic needs, content consumption cannot just be met with national production, but with an integration with other cultures. When there was a cinema festival in Latin America, because the Pinochet dictatorship finished with a cinema festival, Cuba organized the first cinema festival. It created the first Latin American Literature Prize and thereby promoted this cultural integration within the continent. With the internet, we can potentialize even further this integration, and we should seize these opportunities to have better contact amongst us and not wait for the mirror coming from the north to reflect something that we are not. Any further questions? Any further comments, doubts? So with this, I would like to thank you for your presence and your attention, and we can continue our conversation in the hallways of this event. Thank you very much for your attention.